And I am Jacob, and what you will hear today is one of many stories that happened to me, and no one believed it. Last time, I told you about the strange incident that happened to me while I was working as a cleaner on a cruise ship, and about the unknown city in which small people live, ruled by an unjust king, and about my attempts to save the people of the city. But unfortunately, I failed and was unable to do anything. Today, I will tell you another story, new of my many stories that no one believes. Several months after my accident, the ship entered a period of forced downtime, during which the ship was placed in a special workshop in order to carry out all the necessary periodic maintenance and updates that must be carried out by the company that owns the ship in order for it to continue working well. During that period, I had to start looking for another new job because the maintenance period could reach a full month, and therefore I needed to provide a new source of income because I did not want to return to my family's home and depend on my father again. What he had was enough responsibilities, especially after one of my sisters fell ill. I also make sure to send a sum of money to my mother to help her and the family. I know that it is a small amount, but it is better than nothing, and therefore all the circumstances were pushing me towards looking for a new temporary job until the time comes for the ship that I am working on to start working again. I began the journey of searching for a new job on a new ship. I started searching among cruise ships, but unfortunately I was unable to find any work. Most of the ships were content with the crew they already had and did not want to hire more people. I tried searching for cargo ships, fishing vessels, and many other types, but unfortunately to no avail. A whole week I searched for a new job to no avail. My money had almost run out and I did not know how to act. All I had to do was go to the bar to have a drink and have a little fun. I chose a cheap bar in order not to spend a lot of money, and I actually went there. And while I was there, I started talking to the bartender behind the bar and complaining to him that I could not find a job and I did not know what I would do. The bartender was listening to me carefully and was trying to console me, and while I was talking, someone intervened in my conversation with the bartender, and he asked me why you don't go to the Paradise ship to work on it. I did not know what he was talking about, so I asked him what he meant. And here he told me that the Paradise ship always has vacant places to work and does not reject anyone who applies to work on it. I felt happy because of what he said, but the look on the bartender's face worried me. He was nervous and seemed uncomfortable with what the man said. The man continued to describe the ship, the advantages of working on it, and the captain in charge of it, and told me that he was a good man who would not let anyone who turned to him down. After a little time and a lot of talking about the ship, Paradise, the man asked permission to go. As soon as he left, the bartender spoke anxiously and told me not to go to that ship. It was a bad idea. I tried to understand him, but he was secretive, and all he told me was that there were a lot of gossip that sailors circulated about that ship, and it is known that everyone who works on it never comes back, and no one ever knows where they are. I listened to what the bartender said as intently as I could, as I drank a lot of drinks, and I thanked him anyway after paying him the bill, and then I went to sleep in the dingy room I had rented, knowing that I would not be able to sleep in that filthy room which no homeless person would accept to live in. In the course of several days, if I did not find a suitable job, I slept very deeply that night, and early in the morning I woke up to the sounds of fighting at the bottom of the hostel in which I lived. It seemed that the owner of the hostel wanted to evict a person who had not paid his room rent for 3 consecutive days. I felt with a pinch in my stomach, as if telling me that I would be the next person kicked out by the innkeeper, and I needed to act as quickly as possible. I remembered what the man said about the ship Paradise, which always requires workers, and the captain does not refuse anyone who turns to him for work. It seems that my current situation and lack of money have made my mind refuse to remember what the bartender said to me yesterday. I quickly put on my clothes and went downstairs, and as I was going down, I saw the man who seemed to have just been kicked out of the inn, and here I quickly walked towards the ship Paradise. I did not wish to be expelled in the same way from this filthy inn. I went directly to the place of the ship Paradise, and there I found the cafe that the man had told me about. I went in there and asked about Captain Gerald, the captain of the ship Paradise, and here the person I asked pointed me to a man who seemed to be in his late 60s. His hair was completely white, and he seemed to be thinking about something was completely occupying his mind. I thought whether to approach him now or to wait a while until he finished his thoughts. Here, without any preamble, I found that Captain Gerald was looking at me with a smile and motioning for me to come closer. I did not know what to do, but I approached anyway. I greeted him and sat in front of him. Captain Gerald did not give me the opportunity to speak and asked me, "Did you come looking for work?" Here I smiled and shook my head yes, saying that I needed a temporary job for only 3 weeks until the ship I was working on returned to its voyages. Here Captain Gerald laughed and said to me, "Well, I promise you that you will not need to return to the ship again. Working for us will captivate you completely." He began talking to me about the advantages of working on the ship and what it provides for his workers. Everything he said was promising and wonderful, but I do not know why I felt inside me that there was something wrong. What's wrong? There's something mysterious. That smile and the words that the man says, which seem so confident and wonderful, are hiding something behind them. I don't know what it is. Captain Gerald told me that the fishing trips he takes only last 1 week, and then I realized that I would go out on 3 trips. On the ship, Paradise. So it is very convenient for me to return to my former work, especially since the first trip on which I will join the crew of the ship will begin today at midnight. I agreed with Captain Gerald on everything and asked him to give me part of my salary in advance so that I could buy what I needed before the trip, especially since we would be moving in the evening of this day. He actually agreed and gave me a quarter of my salary in advance, and here I immediately moved to the dirty hostel in which I lived and collected my things. Then I ate a piece of bread with salted cheese and tried to sleep for a few hours to prepare for the new journey that will begin this evening. In the evening, I woke up, got dressed, picked up my bag, and went directly to the hostel owner. I told him that I would be leaving today. My room was paid, so I did not need to pay anything. I then went to the market and bought some things, including some cigarettes and a drink, and then I went to the cafe, where I had previously met Captain Gerald, who told me that he would meet me there in the evening. I arrived there at exactly 11 in the evening and found Captain Gerald sitting with 4 men around him. He was talking generally with us about the sea and the dangers of his fishing trips, and then a young man entered the cafe. He went straight to the table where we were sitting. The young man smiled enthusiastically and sat next to me. Then Captain Gerald spoke, saying that the ship's crew was complete, and now we could head to the ship to begin work. I walked next to this young man, whose name was Adam. He was a tall young man and looked like my older brother, to the point that I felt like I knew him, or perhaps had met him before. We arrived at the ship quickly, and here we entered one of the rooms in the interior of the ship. The ship was not large, but it was also not small. It had a fairly large room containing 3 beds. Each one of them had 2 floors, and there were also small lockers in front of the beds for each person in the crew to put his belongings. Next to that room, there was a small room of which I did not see anything, but it was, of course, Captain Gerald's room. The crew divided themselves among the beds, and here I had only the top bunk above Adam's bed. Immediately after Captain Gerald came out of the room and everyone started talking to each other, I think my feeling towards Adam was mutual. We immediately talked and felt a very closeness in our personalities, and here I thought that a friendship relationship would arise between us. Adam was alone with his parents, and his father was very sick, so Adam decided to leave school and go to work. When I told him about myself, he promised me that he would try to teach me to read, and he began telling me about all the books that he read and enjoyed, which talked about sailors and working at sea, and this is what led him to choose to work on ships. The journey began that night. It was strange for the ship to move in the middle of the night. Usually ships move early in the morning, but Captain Gerald told us that he prefers to fish from a specific area, and reaching that area takes a long time, and therefore we must set off in the evening. In order for us to reach that area before dawn in order to start fishing early, we are supposed to remain in that spot throughout the trip until the weekends and we return again to the port. The ship was a lot smaller than the ship I was working on, and that initially made me feel afraid because of the movement of the ship and the sounds of the water. But Adam helped me a lot through it, just by talking to me about any and everything. He was trying to distract me from what I was thinking, and it seemed to work because I quickly felt sleepy and decided to sleep before we arrived, even if only for a short time, so that I would be ready and fresh in the morning for the hunt. This was my first experience working as a fisherman, and I was very excited and wanted to learn this job. I woke up to the sound of knocking on the door. Captain Gerald was telling us that we had arrived in the required area and that the sun would rise in an hour, so we had to wake up and eat our breakfast in order to prepare for work. The ship's crew, 6 people, began to work. 4 of the 6 members had experience in fishing. The 5th was the ship's cook and was responsible for preparing meals for the crew as well as storing the fish that would be caught. As for the 6th, it was me, and I did not have any experience working in fishing. Most of the people with us were harsh and did not talk much, except for Adam, who was the nicest among them and began telling me exactly what I should do and how I could help. Indeed, I followed what he told me and I began to enjoy this work. We caught a lot of fish that day, and after that, we all helped in the process of storing the fish in the refrigerators on the ship. And after we had dinner, everyone was feeling very tired. But even though we felt very tired, I could not sleep, and I felt like I needed to smoke, and here I went out on deck. The sky was pitch black, and the sea is terrifying. But anyway, I tried to finish the cigarette quickly so that I could go back to my bed and sleep, because I have a long day ahead of me tomorrow. While I was outside, I saw one of the men who works with us, and he was also smoking. It seemed that he did not see me, because he did not look at me even once. I finished smoking. I left him without talking to him, and went straight to my bed and fell into a deep sleep. Early in the morning, we woke up again to Captain Gerald's voice in order to get ready. We sat down to have breakfast, and here Captain Gerald asked about Bill. This was the name of the same man whom I saw yesterday smoking a cigarette on the deck of the ship. Here everyone looked at each other and no one answered, so the captain said, "He does not accept that anyone is late in waking up because this means that he will be late for work, which is completely unacceptable on his ship." Here, one of the men volunteered to go and wake up Bill, but he quickly returned with signs of fear on his face. He told us that Bill was not in his bed, and it seemed that he had not. He gets into his bed in the first place, because the bed is made as if he had not slept on it yesterday. Everyone looked at Captain Gerald, who shouted loudly that what was happening was unacceptable and that Bill would never work with us again. Here I felt anxious and did not know what I should do. Should I tell them that I was the last one saw him, or should I remain silent and not speak? Adam jumped up and said, "He must be here somewhere. Maybe he is sick. We must look for him." Everyone except me moved to search for Bill, but unfortunately, they found no trace of him on the ship. His belongings were still in the ship. It was in its place, but he had completely disappeared. Everyone was in a state of obvious tension and anxiety. We all knew that this meant one thing, which was that either Bill had committed suicide or someone had killed him and disposed of his body in the water, but no one spoke. We began work that day. Without any of us saying a word about Bill, we caught huge amounts of fish. They were huge fish. I had never seen fish that big in my life. It was amazing and strange at the same time. When the evening came and we had dinner, I went straight into the room to sleep. I did not feel like I could go up to the deck to smoke. I preferred to sleep because I was feeling very tired and wanting to sleep. I felt strange because I was falling asleep quickly. That was unusual for me, and I thought that the reason for this is the extreme fatigue and effort I put in on a daily basis at work. We woke up in the morning to the voice of Captain Gerald, and as soon as we woke up, we noticed that Rick was not there. One of the men said that he might be in the toilet, but the toilet was empty. We started looking at each other in fear. What was happening? Where did Rick go? But unfortunately, none of us had any answer. Everyone was nervous, so we decided not to talk to each other so as not to fight. Today, we also caught large amounts of huge fish. The fish were so big that I was thinking all the time where all those fish would be stored. It was also suspicious for me, and for the rest of the ship's crew, of which there are only 4 left, and Captain Gerald, who seems to be completely unconcerned by the size of the fish or the disappearance of the men. On the 3rd day, we woke up to Adam's voice calling for Sheldon, but without any response. Sheldon disappeared just as Rick and Bill had disappeared before. It was hideous. Fear gripped us. Captain Gerald ordered us to pull ourselves together and work. Work was slow because the number had become half exactly, and the fish were gigantic sizes that day. In the evening, after we had dinner, I felt a strong desire to sleep, but I sat down to think, and here I began to remember what the bartender at the bar had told me about the sailors who worked on that ship not returning. I felt fear controlling me. I tried to wake Adam up, but he never responded to me, as if he was drugged in some way. Here I fell asleep, and when I woke up to Captain Gerald's voice in the morning and looked down, I did not find Adam. I started screaming Adam's name, but without any response. Adam cannot disappear like this. He cannot have committed suicide. I know that he feels responsible towards his parents and that he will never abandon them. He cannot have killed him, as I am sure I did not kill him. And of course, Bob the cook did not kill him, who was sound asleep yesterday before I went to sleep. Could Captain Gerald be the killer? Could he be the one committing these crimes? Is he killing the crew of his ship, and why? Today was slow, and the work was very difficult. I was working alone with a little help from Bob. At the same time, I was sad for Adam, who did not show up. Even now, I'm distracted thinking about what might have happened. While I was working, I noticed that Captain Gerald was entering the ship's kitchen, and then I asked Bob about Captain Gerald and what he was doing, and he told me that he did not know. Every day, Captain Gerald asked him to leave the kitchen at the same time, and he remained alone in the kitchen, and here I began to realize what was happening. That night, I pretended to be eating dinner. Fortunately, I had saltine biscuits that I had bought before boarding the ship. I ate them so I wouldn't feel hungry, and I went to bed at the appointed time. That day, I did not feel sleepy at all, and here I began to realize that I was on the right track. After an hour, I heard the sound of the room door moving. I realized that someone had entered the room, so I pretended to be asleep. But at the same time, I was opening my eyes a little, and here I saw him. It was Captain Gerald himself. He entered the room to my bed and looked at the bed on the lower floor. He did not find me, and then he looked up. He turned his head and saw me sleeping on the top, so he sighed impatiently and went to the first bed, where Bob was sleeping deeply at the bottom. And here I noticed him grabbing both ends of the bed sheet and pulling it down and heading outside. I couldn't move for a few seconds, but I also couldn't stay in place. After some time, I went out to look for Captain Gerald, and I stood in front of the door of his room listening, and when I did not listen to anything, I went up to the deck of the ship very quietly, and here I heard Captain Gerald's voice. He was repeating incomprehensible words and drawing something on Bob's face, who seemed to be completely unconscious, and then he threw him into the water. I put my hand over my mouth so as not to make any sound of shock, and withdrew quietly, so that Captain Gerald would not notice me. I could not sleep that night, and I felt him when he entered the room again, and quietly put the sheet on the bed, and then left. Then I heard the sound of his room door opening and closing again, so I understood that he had gone to sleep. I was terrified. What I saw meant that I was in the middle of the sea with a serial killer, a crazy killer. I don't know the meaning of the words he was saying or what was happening. After several hours, I heard the sound of Captain Gerald knocking on the door and asking me about Bob, where he had gone to. I looked at him, and I didn't know what to say, but I pretended that I did not know and that I was sick. Captain Gerald looked at me and told me to go to sleep again, and he would take care of the work. There was not much left, he said, and Captain Gerald actually went up to the deck and began working. After 5 minutes, I decided to move. I quietly left the room, and then I went to Captain Gerald's room. I did not listen to anything. I wanted to make sure he was up on deck. Then I went up quietly and saw him working diligently and energetically. It seemed that he had caught a large amount of giant fish, like every day. I went back down and headed up to Captain Gerald's room. I opened the room. It consisted of a small bed. Next to it was a short cupboard and a table whose paint was peeling. On that table was a book that looked old. It was called Magic of the Seas. I went to that book and grabbed it, and then I noticed that there was a mark in that book from the inside on one of the pages, and here I opened the book and understood what was happening. That page was a spell used by fishermen who would be able to catch a lot of large and abundant fish, but human sacrifices had to be made. I couldn't read anything, but I could understand because everything was illustrated. I felt afraid and almost cried, and I could not move, especially when I heard the sound of the door of the room opening suddenly. It was Captain Gerald who opened the door, and he was the one standing behind me and looking at me angrily. He quickly approached me to attack me, but I managed to escape. He followed me, but I pushed him, and he fell and crashed into one of the chairs, and it seemed that he lost consciousness. I stood thinking, what should I do and how should I act? But I noticed that the captain was starting to wake up, and here I did not think for a second. I picked up one of the life rafts on the deck of the ship and jumped into the water. My swimming abilities were not great, as I previously told you, but I preferred to die trying rather than die as a sacrifice. After several hours, I was rescued by another ship that was passing near me, and when I told them what happened, no one believed me, but they left me to contact the police and tell them. It seems that the police also did not believe me, especially since when they searched for the ship Paradise, they did not find any trace of it, and they considered that the Captain Gerald sank in his ship. I was feeling very angry and sad because I was unable to convince anyone of what happened to me, and because of the men who treacherously died on the deck of the ship, especially Adam.